contradictions. I've never met Keir Starmer, I'm delighted to say, but we have, as they say, previous. At the time of my cancellation back in 2020, Starmer was the only person in public life who wanted poor little Darren Grimes and me to be charged under the Section 6 of the Public Order Act, which I think carries mandatory imprisonment and up to 6 years. But is the measure of the man, the measure of his nastiness, the measure of his desire for vengeance, the measure of his hatred of free speech.
David Starkey is never one to hold back. Known as one of Britain's most fearless and unapologetic historians, he has spent decades dissecting the characters and decisions of kings, queens, and prime ministers, often with devastating precision. But this time, his sharp lens was not turned on Henry VIII or Elizabeth I. It was aimed directly at Sir Keir Starmer, the current Labour leader. And what Starkey revealed live on television has left the political world reeling. It was not just commentary. It was an unmasking, a brutal exposure of a past that Starmer has carefully tried to keep in the shadows. For millions watching, it was a moment of shock, disbelief, and a question that now hangs heavy over British politics. Can Keir Starmer truly be trusted to lead the nation? From the very beginning of the broadcast, Starkey set a tone that was impossible to ignore. His words were calm, measured, and delivered with the authority of a man who has spent his life studying the nature of power. But beneath that calmness was a fire, an anger at what he described as hypocrisy, concealment, and betrayal of the values that Britain was built upon. He declared that the British public deserved to know the full truth about the man who aspires to be their Prime Minister, not just the carefully polished version presented in speeches and press conferences. He began by peeling back the layers of Starmer's early career as a barrister. For Starkey, this was not a story of a man serving justice, but of a man deliberately aligning himself with causes that stood in opposition to the nation's values. He reminded viewers that Starmer chose to represent some of the most controversial clients imaginable, including those who stood against the state, against tradition, and against the very sense of national identity that binds Britain together. While defenders of Starmer argue that this was simply his duty as a lawyer, Starkey rejected that excuse. He asked a piercing question: when given a choice, who does a man choose to stand beside, and what does that say about the convictions in his heart? The studio grew heavy as Starkey's words cut deeper. He then moved on to Starmer's role as Director of Public Prosecutions, a period that Starmer often celebrates as proof of his integrity and leadership. Yet Starkey dismantled this narrative with ruthless efficiency. He accused Starmer of presiding over a justice system increasingly bent by the winds of political correctness, where decisions were made not purely on evidence, but on ideology. He pointed to cases where the balance of fairness seemed to tilt, where the pursuit of fashionable causes outweighed the cold, even-handed application of justice. For Starkey, this was not leadership. It was manipulation. It was the bending of justice itself into a political weapon. Then came the most devastating moment of all. Starkey reminded viewers of Starmer's transformation from a radical activist to the supposed voice of moderation that he now presents to the public. He accused Starmer of being a man without roots, a man who sheds identities as easily as he changes his tie. Once hailed by left-wing circles as a defender of radical causes, Starmer has now recast himself as the steady, pragmatic statesman. But Starkey insisted this was not a genuine evolution. It was theater, a performance designed not to serve the truth, but to seize power. The atmosphere in the studio was electric. Even the interviewer, accustomed to dealing with sharp commentary, seemed caught off guard by the sheer ferocity of Starkey's dismantling. For the audience at home, it was more than just a history lesson. It was a moment of clarity where the polished mask of Sir Keir Starmer appeared to slip, revealing something far more unsettling beneath. But Starkey did not stop at history. He turned to the present, to the promises Starmer has made as Labour leader. He pointed out the glaring contradictions: pledges of fiscal responsibility paired with expensive commitments, vows of transparency delivered through carefully crafted vagueness, declarations of unity made in a party still fractured at its core. For Starkey, it was not enough to call these contradictions political strategy. He called them deceptions. Tricks played on a weary public desperate for change, but in danger of falling for a leader who tells them what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. The emotional weight of Starkey's words was undeniable. He was not shouting, not ranting, but speaking with the intensity of a man who believes the stakes could not be higher. He described Starmer as a man who has mastered the art of concealment, a leader whose past is full of radicalism, whose present is full of contradiction, and whose future, if unchecked, could bring consequences Britain is not ready to face. Viewers across the country watched in silence, many stunned at the rawness of what they were hearing. This was not the standard back and forth of political debate. It was a direct assault on character, a challenge to everything the Labour leader has presented himself to be, and it forced people to confront questions they might have preferred to ignore. Who is the real Keir Starmer? What lies behind the carefully chosen words and polished image? And most importantly, is this a man we can entrust with the future of our nation? Starkey's intervention was more than just political theatre. It was a warning, a historian's warning, rooted not in partisan allegiance, but in an understanding of how leaders rise and how nations fall. He reminded viewers that history is full of figures who presented one face to the people and another to themselves. And he asked, with chilling clarity, whether Keir Starmer might one day be remembered as one of them. But as the segment drew to a close, Starkey left his audience with something even more unsettling, the sense that this was not over, that the questions he had raised would not disappear simply because Labour's spin machine went into overdrive, that the truth about Keir Starmer's past would continue to haunt him, especially now that someone as formidable as David Starkey had dragged it into the light. Stay with us, because in the next part, we are going to dive even deeper into the aftermath of this explosive interview. We'll explore how the media reacted, how the public responded, and why this moment could mark a turning point not just for Starmer's career, but for the entire political landscape of Britain.